Good afternoon and welcome. It's great to have you all here with our joint event with the Friedrich Naumann Foundation and EPICENTER. My name is Adam Bartha, and I'm the director of EPICENTER, which is a network of 9 leading classical liberal think tanks from across Europe. And I'm tremendously excited to be here today, as I have the pleasure to welcome 3 experts from 3 of our members' think tanks, plus someone who is very much shaping the trade agenda of our continent within the walls of the European Commission. But before I introduce them and crack on with the exciting part, please allow me to spend 2 minutes with some of the housekeeping rules. I'm obliged to warn you that today's discussion will be recorded and simultaneously live streamed on YouTube. So all guests who are watching on Zoom will be on mute throughout the duration of the webinar, but we do count on your participation through other means. In the first half of the webinar, I will be asking and challenging some of our speakers about some of the recommendations that they have made in a newly released discussion paper, Raising Barriers. And of course, I will be asking about the track record of the European Commission when it comes to trade liberalization. In the second half of the webinar, I will be handing the floor over to you to ask your questions to our panel of experts. So for guests on the Zoom side, if you do wish to ask a question, please select the Q&A at the bottom of your screen and type out your question. During the Q&A session, I will be the one reading out your questions for our guest speakers to address. If you're rather on the shy side of things, you also have the ability to upvote a question if you would like to see some of them answered more than others. And if we do have a great number of questions, then I will proceed in a democratic manner and look to address the ones that get the most votes. Of course, last but not least, feel free to utilize the chat function as well. My colleagues will be posting a couple of useful links and papers in there, but of course, you're also welcome to provide your own thoughts and your own paper recommendations. One thing I would ask is to not post the questions in the chat function. All questions should be posted using the Q&A function. So with the housekeeping rules out of the way, now on to the exciting part. Today's discussion aims to serve 2 purposes simultaneously. First of all, we do have some fantastic authors in the room who have written a discussion paper called Raising Barriers, Transforming Trade Attitudes in Southern Europe. And I will be asking them to provide their thoughts on some of the interesting findings in this paper. But besides identifying some of the problems that the paper also outlines, we're also curious to provide some solutions to trade liberalization, how trade can be made more popular across the EU. And here we very much count on the insights of the European Commission as well, besides our think tank experts. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce the 4 panelists who are here with us today. First of all, a very warm welcome to Piotr Rydowski, who is joining us from the European Commission, which he has worked for since 2005. He has worked on multiple trade issues, including dual-use export controls, WTO accessions, trade facilitation, fisheries subsidies, and he was also responsible for the preparation of the EU's participation in the 9th, 10th, and 11th WTO Ministerial Conference. As of 2019, he is in DG Trade Strategy Unit, where he has been most recently responsible for the preparation of the EU's new trade strategy. Also, a very warm welcome to Antonio Umuloni, who is the senior researcher at Fundación Civismo, and who is specializing in trade, multilateralism, and transatlantic Iberian-American relations. Antonio holds a master's degree in economics, law, and journalism, as well as an MBA, and he's a regular contributor to several Spanish and international media outlets. We are also very happy to welcome Konstantinos Saravakos, who is the research project coordinator at CAFIM, and who is a political scientist by profession. His main research interests include regulation and political economy, so any topics related to poverty, inequality, and prosperity. And he's also very much interested in assessing the voting behavior of political parties related to many different policy areas. And last but not least, I'm also very happy to welcome Carlo Stagnaro with us, who's the Research and Studies Director at Instituto Bruno Leoni. Previously, he was the Chief of Minister's Technical Staff at Italy's Ministry of Economic Development, and he's also a member of the Academic and Advisory Council of the Institute of Economic Affairs, based in London, and a fellow of the Italian Observatory on Energy Poverty at the University of Padua. And Carlo is also a member of the editorial board of two journals called Energia and Aspenia. So we have a fantastic team of panelists, and Carlo, if you don't mind me kicking off with you first. You're one of the co-authors of the Raising Barriers paper, and together with your fellow colleagues, you have analyzed over 16 FTAs and the ratification process of them in 3 different Southern European countries. So what were the most surprising results for you about the voting behavior of political parties when it comes to ratifying trade agreements?
Yes, thank you, Adam, and thanks to all who are following this webinar this morning. As Adam has said, the report covers the debate about the ratification of 16 free trade agreements in the European Union at the level of the European Parliament, as well as in the national parliaments of 3 Southern European countries, namely Spain, Greece, and Italy. We found a couple of interesting things that we believe will deserve some discussion and perhaps also some policy debate regarding how to improve the environment for free trade agreements in the European Union. First of all, out of the, even though international trade is theoretically speaking an exclusive competence of the European Union, only 3 out of 16 free trade agreements were voted at the EU level alone. In fact, most free trade agreements include the provisions regarding issues and materials that are that fall within the competence of national governments and national parliaments, and therefore they have to be voted upon by national parliaments as well. Second interesting point that we raised through the study is that we found that, and this may probably not be a particular surprise to most of you, we found that populist parties tend to be more likely to oppose free trade agreements than traditional parties do. But, and this is a third sort of conclusion or remark that we make in the paper, even the traditional parties tend to have some perplexities, to say so, about free trade agreements, especially when they are not part of a governing majority. In fact, even populist parties, when they are involved in a governing majority, tend to soften their position. So it's interesting to see and to underline that both populist and non-populist parties tend to be more on the anti-trade side of the debate when they have no governing responsibility, and they shift to pro-trade positions when they actually have a responsibility, that is, when their position has actual consequences. So last and final point of my introduction, which tries to put all of this together and perhaps anticipates also a few points that we discuss in a forthcoming briefing for EPICENTER, which is being written with Konstantinos and Antonio as well, is that perhaps this kind of apparently irrational or non-obviously rational dynamics should call for some kind of reform or some kind of intervention, especially in consideration of the fact that free trade agreements eventually are usually approved by European institutions as well as national institutions. But national governments quite often use their veto power, or national parliaments use their veto power to bargain or to obtain results that they seek on other tables and on other issues which are unrelated to free trade. So the question, rather than the answer that we provide, is that perhaps some sort of reform or revision should be discussed in order to increase the responsibility of the European Parliament as compared to national parliaments when it comes to international trade, just for the sake of saving time, getting to the result as soon as possible, and under the consideration that all of the oppositions and perplexities or doubts, whatever, can still be conveyed within the European Parliament, and they do not really need to get into national parliaments to be listened to. And so this is my conclusion. I didn't say, I just mentioned in the end that, of course, from our point of view, I mean, I think I'm speaking on behalf of all the authors and all the think tanks represented. Free trade is a net gain for all the parties taking place in it, and therefore our position, I mean, ideological, if you like, but also empirically grounded, is that free trade agreements are an important contribution to development, growth, and prosperity in Europe, as well as in the countries which negotiate free trade agreements with us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carlo. I think you touched upon some very interesting issues. First of all, the kind of political opportunism of parties when it comes to voting on FTAs. I think that's a rather interesting finding. If I'm an optimist, it's a good news that when they actually do have power, they tend to vote, or they are more likely to vote for FTA ratifications. But we're going to return to the competencies and the solutions in a bit. If you don't mind me turning to Piotr for a moment, the man who is very much in the middle of things when it comes to trade negotiations. Piotr, from my perspective, which is definitely a classical liberal perspective, I'm pretty delighted when the Commission concludes a negotiation process of an FTA. The faster, the better, and the deeper, the better. But often concluding the negotiation is just the first hurdle that we're passing. And there are so many more hoops to jump through to actually get a trade deal ratified. What do you think the Commission can do in the future to speed up both the negotiation and the ratification process of comprehensive free trade agreements?
Thanks, Adam. Real pleasure to be here. Perhaps just to start off, let me say that congratulations to the co-authors of this paper. It's very interesting, insightful issues being set out in there. And I think it's quite interesting to pick up where actually Carlo left off. The point that he made about political powers, political parties being more pro-trade when they're in power rather than in a situation where they're out of power, and the reasons for that. I think it really pinpoints to an issue that is, I think, quite obvious for many, though perhaps not for all, and that is that economic aspect of trade policy and the economic benefits of trade agreements. So why do we do trade agreements? We do trade agreements, be they bilateral, plurilateral, multilateral, for good reasons. They make perfect economic sense. 38 million jobs, in fact, depend on EU exports. 18% of total EU employment is directly or indirectly linked to EU exports. 16 million jobs depend on foreign investment in the EU. Above that, you have, of course, the idea that stability and predictability are needed for trade to function, and you have that increasingly important in a increasingly volatile environment. And trade agreements also provide us with that platform for bilateral cooperation. I guess it's it's obvious, but it's worth restating. If we have platforms for cooperation with other partners, we're able to actually talk to them about things that are important for us, be they economic issues or be they sustainability issues or other issues that we consider important. Without those platforms, we're just one of many trying to get a dialogue going on some topics. So we have a very clear interest in pursuing negotiations, and as you said, Adam, in your introduction, it's not just conducting negotiations, but it's also finalizing them and actually being able to get these agreements on the books. Unfortunately, things aren't going as good and as well as we would like. Apart from certain exceptions, agreements are indeed taking a very long time to get finalized, and that applies not just to the bilateral sphere, but also to the plurilateral and multilateral sphere, as you very well know. And I think it's interesting to dwell a bit on the reason for that, the sort of growing divergence, I think, between expectations that are out there. Expectations on the one hand of economic operators who obviously want to have new opportunities being created for them, new markets being opened, and the expectations of some other stakeholders who feel that trade agreements need to be used to pursue non-trade policy objectives. And I think the interesting thing in this sort of growing divergence is that there's little overlap between these two groups and the sort of concessions that they can be making. So those who are requiring new issues to be added to the negotiating agenda are not necessarily ready to provide concessions in the negotiating process to get those ideas and those requests through. And that obviously creates a very, very difficult dynamic, which has its impact on the complexity of negotiations, on the length of the negotiations, and then on the whole process of trying to get these agreements through in the ratification phase. Incidentally, one of the ways that this problem and this growing divergence has been sort of addressed over the last couple of years has been this, I guess, attempt to introduce more and more issues into trade agreements, leading to their complexity. We talk about the CETA, the EU-Canada agreement. It has 30 chapters, 50 annexes and schedules, a very broad range of issues to be dealt with. And I think there is an appetite in other negotiations to go even further than that. And the question, I think, for all of us, it's not just a question to me, it's a question for everyone, whether this approach is really the best approach in today's context, and whether it is something that is going to bear fruit. And I'll be very interested to engage in a further discussion with you today on the perspectives for that.
Thank you, Peter. We are definitely going to pick up on your sentence about pursuing non-trade policy objectives through FTAs. I think that's a crucial point, and I know that quite a few classical liberal colleagues of mine have somewhat criticized the EU's approach when it comes to pursuing too many things within a given period of time of the negotiation processes. So we will come back to that. But if you don't mind me turning to Antonio for a moment, Antonio is also one of the co-authors of our publication, Raising Barriers to Trade. And Antonio, you have identified quite a few themes when it comes to protectionism and protectionist campaign groups and some of the political parties that argue against free trade deals that were negotiated by the Commission. So what are the most common reasons for opposing FTAs? And is there kind of good free market, good liberal rebuttal to some of these problems?
Thank you, Adam. Thank you for the question and for having us on behalf of theories as well. Well, yeah, free trade is always opposed by many groups, by different groups, not only in the European Union, but in the whole Western world. And it's something, it is a trend, it's something really common. we've identified 3 main groups in which every opposition agent can be included. These are the incumbent businesses, so those agents that are already in the market, established and operating, labor, trade unions, and environmental groups. Those 3 sectors have something in common. They have 2 main aspects in common. The first of them is their arguments. They always consider or just just focus on the short-term problems regarding trade. They focus on what they consider the downside of trade, and of course they are only able to put the spotlight on the short term because, well, that's what they are there for. Because, well, their second aspect they share is they are well organized, which is really important. They have a strong position in their countries, because on top of being organized, they are strongly linked to political parties, especially to those who are not in power. They have more influence on those parties who are not in power at the time. Those, especially in the south of Europe, those groups are really important, and the political structure is more bureaucratic, and political parties are really important in society, not only politics. And they are a link between those organized groups, strong influential lobbies, and the system itself. So the citizen, the individual who is not organized but benefits from free trade barely can compete against those groups. So how can we overcome those hurdles when it comes to free trade? Well, first of all, we know empirically, we know by facts that trade is positive for the man on the street. We've been knowing it for decades, for forever. So we have, let's say, truth by our side. So we can, that the very strong, the really strong argument we have, but we have to kind of organize ourselves. We have to share the message in a more efficient way. We have to, I think, documents like this, probably I shouldn't say it, but I think it is important to share this message. And on top of that, it is empirically and is based on facts, and it's not only beneficial in terms of economy, it's not only economically positive, it is also positive socially, politically, and we've seen it in the European Union and before, since world trade commerce started to become a reality. Peace has become something more and more present in our lives, in our societies, and European Union is a fantastic example of that. So it's not only about the economy, it is above all about trust between our nations and in our society.
I think you're touching on a very important issue. It's not just an economic argument about growing the pie, but it's also kind of a geopolitical argument that Piotr also touched upon, that it makes other kind of relations with other areas of the world easier and a bit smoother. So we will come back to that as well, but I would like to touch upon a topic that Carlo already mentioned. So Konstantinos, together with Carlo, you have suggested several solutions on how it might be possible to speed up both the negotiation and the ratification, but especially the ratification process of FTAs across the continent. So can you share with us what those possible solutions might be, and whether you think that those solutions actually do have a realistic chance to be implemented in the next 5 or 10 years?
Of course. First of all, Adam, let me thank you for giving us the opportunity to have this study with our co-authors. And let me first of all explain the shared competences framework in order to be all aligned with how is the process right now in the European Union. So we know that European Union is a multi-level complex political system. For this reason, member states have given some of the national competencies to European Union institutions in order to conclude agreements and represent the interests of EU citizens. But this process is delayed by the national parliaments for several reasons that Antonio explained earlier. It's political reasons, actually, and the opposition from interest groups. What we have in European Union is the so-called mixed competencies. So both European Union member states have their own competencies and actions need to take for the ratification and enforcement of European Union agreements with other regions of the world. And the EU has the exclusive competencies to conclude the agreements and enforce them. Let me tell you about a trick that recently European Union has found or a policy tool, if I should put it in a more formal way, to overcome the obstacles coming from the national parliaments, because the ratification takes long. In Greece, we have ratificated only 30% of the last 13 agreements concluded by the European Union. So this trick is to break the agreements to two separate agreements for the same trade partnership. So one with including EU exclusive competencies only, and another one with the shared competencies which needs the national ratification. With this policy, the part with the EU exclusive competencies can be enforced directly, while the part for the member states can be provisionally enacted until the formal ratification. In fact, that was what was done by the EU institutions with Singapore, Japan, and Vietnam, the last agreements they had. So we have a problem that the way we enforce ratification, we enforce the agreements right now, and all the parts of free trade agreements on the one hand should be enacted, but on the other hand, we need to deal also with the democratic deficit European Union is usually accused, and the distance the EU citizens and stakeholders bring from the epicenter of action, which is Brussels. So I think that besides the policy, the tool that I mentioned earlier, a quite effective policy could be the member states to grant more trade competencies to EU institutions in order to speed up the enforcement. In this way, I know that this sounds to deepening the democratic deficit on the one hand, but on the other hand, EU could simultaneously promote the further engagement of domestic audiences in the negotiating process. It could engage the national chambers, economic chambers, and the negotiations, although the negotiations seem to take now place behind closed doors, and that's what the EU institutions are accused right now. The time we save in the ratification process, if we speed up with more competencies to EU institutions, we can save it from negotiations process with stakeholders and engagement. Not to mention that domestic audiences really need to be listened more on European Union level. Let me give you an example. The local producers from Crete or from Sardinia or from Andalusia need to be aware that the European Union listens to the problems they face in local production and one international competition will bring. And we need to smoothen away these obstacles with listen to the people and provide solutions to their problems that indeed in the short run the countries face. I believe that give more competencies, maybe its member state to a different extent, and the further engagement of local stakeholders during negotiations to a more open process could deal with the two main problems and speed up the ratification problems. This could also be accompanied by more involvement by the members of the European Parliament. We should not forget that the members of the European Parliament are elected, and very often in Greece, what we say is that we see them once in the election and once after 4 years. We don't have any connection with these people. So the member of the European Parliament should be engaged more in the political discourse in their homes, in their countries, and explain to the stakeholders and the local audiences why these policies are for the better of European Union, why we need them, which are the shortcomings and we have to face, and which policies, cohesion policies of the European Union can tackle these obstacles and these challenges they face, and why for overall in the European Union we need further trade agreements. So this is pretty much the framework of shared competencies, the problems of ratification national level, and how maybe we could promote and speed up the free trade agreements. I think that the most challenging one and the most difficult is the member states to grant more competences to the European Union, given the democratic deficit and the distance of European Union citizens of Brussels. I think that the engagement and more open negotiation process and consultation process is more achievable, and of course the further engagement of members of the parliaments in the local politics.
So basically, Konstantinos, in a way, you threw the ball over to Piotr and the European Commission. Basically, you're trying to say that there are a lot of things that shouldn't be discussed at the ratification stage, but they should be addressed a lot earlier and on in the process. So Piotr, you also touched upon similar issues, and you have mentioned that there are a lot of interests within the EU that try to pursue non-trade policy objectives through FTAs. So, environmental issues or human rights issues often come to the forefront when it comes to the early on negotiation process. So what do you think? Is that going to continue in the foreseeable future? And is that actually the right way to address free trade in the 21st century, utilizing the EU's big single market to get other countries to also prioritize some of the policy areas that the EU seems to prioritize?
Thanks, Adam. Well, in response to your question, I would start off by saying that we sometimes fall into the trap of thinking that everything is black and white, that rather than the situation that we have now, we could live in some kind of idyllic world where trade agreements would just deal with hardcore trade issues and nothing else. And I think that that's unfeasible, but it would sort of miss the point a bit. I think we need to admit and accept that trade agreements do have to play some kind of role in pursuing non-trade policy objectives. It's natural. It's natural that you put some of these things into trade agreements. Where the problem appears is when the expectations with regard to what you can do isn't mirrored by the reality on the ground, both in terms of the acceptance of our negotiating partners, but also the concessions that I mentioned in terms of getting deals through. That's one aspect. The other aspect is something that, at the lack of a better formulation, I would call a need for instant gratification, a sort of feeling that we're going to put some things into trade agreements, some of these non-trade policy objectives, and magically we're going to see a change within a very, very short time frame. So speaking of climate change, that we're going to put some climate change related issues into trade agreements, and that voila, we're going to stop climate change from happening. I mean, we have to get rid of this sort of very odd approach to looking at these things, and accept that trade policy has a role to play, a certain role to play, and it is playing that role by providing a platform for cooperation, by moving the goalpost a bit on certain issues. But it's not the miracle tool that is going to solve all of our problems. Admittedly, our institutional setup and the fact that trade policy is one of the few exclusive competences in the EU makes this a very tall order. There is a natural focus on trade policy, but I think with that we go back to the point that Konstantinos mentioned several times in what he was saying: the need to continue dialogue, exchange of sort of views at all levels on these trade policy questions, spreading the word about how all of this works, where their interests lie, what trade policy can and cannot do, and have a frank discussion on that, and try to sort of develop a new consensus, a new sort of basis for trade policy to operate. The final thing that I'll mention on this, which I think is quite interesting, and that is that we're sort of faced with a moving goalpost all too often with regard to these non-trade policy objectives and the broader trade debate. So the fact that we are taking quite a long time to get some of these agreements negotiated and then ratified means that things have significantly moved from the time that you actually request a mandate from the council and you engage in negotiations and you finalize those negotiations, and you reach a point that the sort of dynamic that was there at the start doesn't necessarily reflect the dynamic that was there at the end when you need the political agreement to finalize a deal. And that's something that is very difficult to deal with, but everybody needs to be conscious of that sort of limitation.
Let me push you on Konstantinos's last point about the inclusion or the wider inclusion of stakeholders across member states early on in the negotiation process. So with CETA, for example, the Commission has been very often criticized that the process hasn't been transparent enough. People didn't know the exact mandate of the Commission, and they didn't exactly know what to expect when it comes to the ratification process. So what steps did the Commission actually make to increase the transparency of the negotiation process and to address kind of some of the trade skepticism as early on as possible?
Thanks, Adam, for that question. I think I have a feeling that we sort of get carried away at times with this criticism of transparency and some of the sort of repercussions with regard to skepticism associated with this. I think the fact of the matter is that the EU is the most transparent administration when it comes to trade negotiations around. You have this policy of transparency going forward on two very distinct tracks. One is publication of documents at all of the phases of the negotiating process, from the preparatory phase through the negotiations, through the actual implementation of the agreement. Then you have the second track of transparency, which is engagement with stakeholders, a very, very broad approach being deployed with regard to civil society dialogue, discussions with member states at various levels, discussions with the European Parliament, precisely to try to get that input and those concerns established as quickly as possible, and to show that there's nothing to hide in here. It's not a process of negotiations that is secret because there's something being hidden. This transparency mechanism is there in order for everyone to feel comfortable and help us improve our understanding of what it is that society and civil society particularly expects. And I think it's important to keep in mind that the sort of situation on the ground reflects this approach in the sense that survey results, in particular Eurobarometer surveys, the last one from 2019, show that there is very broad support for trade policy across the EU. Broadly speaking, 6 in 10 EU citizens say that they trust the EU to conduct trade policy in an open and transparent manner. 60% of Europeans feel that they personally benefit from international trade. And what is very interesting, 71% of respondents in that survey believe that the EU is highly effective in defending their country's trade interests. Those types of figures don't come from nowhere. They come from the fact that there has been a very steady process of engagement, discussion, and building up trust. Of course, as we all see, there are problems. The fact that we can't get certain agreements through, that we can't get certain negotiations finalized, is obviously the main thing, and we need to step up our game to try to fix that as far as we can. On the process side, I think we need to just continue persevering with the transparency approach that we have, dialogue, and once again, dialogue. But also, again, mirroring Konstantinos' point, making those discussions more local, investing in that trade relationship and that discussion at member state level, at local level, a process which incidentally has moved quite a bit over the last year and a half because of the pandemic, because of the access to virtual tools, and the fact that we had this trade policy review public consultation last year.
Sure. So to summarize, basically, we're on the right track. There are some tinkering at the edges that are necessary, but in terms of transparency, the EU is better than the rest, even if it has potential to improve. But we also have a great audience with some great questions. So I've seen some questions flooding in already. If you haven't asked any, but you're interested, make sure that you write in the Q&A function or upvote already existing questions. One of the most popular questions is from Luciana, who is touching upon a topic that Konstantinos already addressed. Basically, the discrepancy between short-term concentrated losses of trade and the long-term dispersed winners. So Luciana is asking that free trade means pricely competitive goods in the market, but how can producers from Crete, Sardinia, or Andalusia be assured that their products will be competitive enough in a challenging marketplace? So Konstantinos and Carlo, what is your answer to the kind of short-term losses that some of the producers might experience as a result of increased competition thanks to free trade agreements? Konstantinos.
Yes, let me begin. Actually, the answer is probably they can't know in advance. When you have a competitive market and you're open to international competition, when you go to the supermarket, the consumer sees the products and decides which one fits better the needs. So actually, you are going to see if your product is competitive in the market. And if not, then you have two choices: to adjust and lower the price and make it more competitive, or differentiate your product from your competitor, or to leave, to quit the business and reallocate your resources and your expertise to other economic activities that they are more efficient. So this is mainly the answer. However, we have to face and to deal with these shortcomings in the short run, and we need not to leave this in the citizens. I would not be against of a cohesion policy from the European Union, which could give some incentives or some support to local producers and firms in order to reallocate the resources in terms of consultancy, in terms of funds, maybe. But I don't want to be heard as the one who asks for more subsidies. That's not the case, because in Greece, we know the story. We know how the story begins in the early 80s with the law packages and the involvement of agriculture in Greece. And we have this also this joke in Greece when when the law came into Greece, there was an officer that said, "Oh, I thought you were a package, not a person." So actually, this is not the case I would like to bring to our attention right now. We are talking for specific and targeted cohesion policies, which should address the problems of the people that will lost the battle of open competition, and they have to reallocate the resources or adjust. So the answer is they will not know it in advance. If they see that they are not competitive, they need to adjust or reallocate the resources. And the EU has to make some specific policies to address these challenges.
Carlo, anything to add?
Yeah, I completely agree with Konstantinos. I would only add one thing. I happen to have done some research on insularity. That is why islands tend to be poorer than comparable regions in the same countries. And one reason is that islands, to some extent, have to be autonomous. They have to produce a number of goods internally, and therefore their specialization is to some extent prevented. Now, while this is to some extent a fact of reality, that is a given. If you are an island, you are an island. Free trade and of course free movement of goods and people as well can help islands to become better integrated, and therefore it can allow them to specialize more in those processes and products or services where they are comparatively, or there may be comparatively more competitive. So in a way, obviously, free trade, especially if it is being opened vis-a-vis countries or regions that were traditionally closed, may have a sort of disruptive consequences, and therefore I agree with Konstantinos that there is a scope for policies to let's say to reduce the short-term negative impacts, but it also creates a long-run potential for remote regions or previously isolated regions as well. And in fact, the expected gains are larger for regions that used to be relatively more close to trade than to regions that were already well interconnected in global trade.
Thanks, Carlo. We have a question from Matthew that's more about the kind of political realities and the political angle. Matthew writes that with what Carlo and Antonio have said about political parties not being in office, who are more opposed to FTAs through influence groups and the rest, rival political parties who are not in office, given that the political, no, sorry about that. So I got lost because the question disappeared. So Matthew's question is about the political realities, about the political parties that are opposing free trade deals because they're currently not in government. He's arguing that this is rather a political problem and not a policy problem. So is a solution for classical liberals to present a vision of an enduring society rather than a set of policies for any one election in particular to counter the short-term populist approaches? So are we too worried about the kind of narrative or the short-term policy issues rather than the long-term narrative when it comes to free trade deals? And what is the broader kind of societal campaign or societal solution where free trade deals and free trade in general can be made more popular? Antonio, do you have any kind of solutions for the long-term vision?
Oh, thank you, Adam. It's a great question because, well, it's in Spain, for instance, the two main political parties during democracy, Socialist Party and People's Party, they have always agreed when it came to free trade agreements. So it didn't happen in Spain where politics are really tough at times, but in this very aspect they haven't collided. So it's interesting, and probably that happened because there is a framework agreement within society itself, in which everybody or almost everybody, every politician accepts that European agreements or multilateral, bilateral agreements are beyond political fight, discussion, and both big parties, traditional parties, haven't come with arguments at this respect. However, the new parties, which are becoming larger and larger in the last 10 years, I would say, are not in that position. They are opposing more and more to not only to specific trade agreements, but to the mindset behind it, to the framework. They consider, and in all our countries, the main traditional parties are not well regarded at this time. So, because for many reasons, and this vision is translating and to their positions. And free trade agreements is a side effect of this. It's been damaged because of the image the people have on those parties. So what can be done is, of course, something is not working, is not going on very well at this respect. Something is changing in Europe. It's not two big parties anymore, or not at this time. Probably what has happened, and this going back to what Carlos pointed out, those new parties haven't been in power for long times. Well, in Italy it happened, but not in Spain at all. And those new parties haven't been in power, so they are still able to maintain those radical positions. So probably as time goes by, it will change at the end. So, I wouldn't care that much, but probably there is an opposition, there is a worry, and they are making the most of it, taking advantage actually. So what can we do just to finish is probably there's some groups which have a voice, but it turns into a not positive outcome when political parties use that voice to collide against each other. So as long as the main groups get into power, everything will smooth. That's what experience tells us. So I wouldn't worry that much regarding the new parties and those positions.
Sure. So everything in the long term, we're going to be fine. All right. We have a question from Ronald that's rather addressed to Piotr. He is asking, could you please comment on the recent push for higher EU autonomy by politicians, from the production of cars and batteries to the production of protective equipment and pharmaceutical drugs? How to better explain to citizens and politicians the difference between EU autonomy and EU resilience? They are often wrongly presented as synonyms. So this kind of EU strategic autonomy, it has been a big buzzword of the recent 2 years in Brussels. Is that just a different word for protectionism, or is there kind of an open, more global EU strategic autonomy that's possible to pursue alongside free trade?
Thanks, Adam. That's again an excellent question, and it goes to the heart of actually our new trade policy strategy, and something that we refer in that strategy as open strategic autonomy, which somehow tries to put all of these elements together and tries to make sense out of multiple issues that have come up over the last couple of months. But just to start at the beginning, I think it's useful to recall that this discussion about increased strategic autonomy, this discussion about resilience, all of that came to the fore at the beginning of the pandemic. Obviously, strategic autonomy has been there for a long time, but the discussion really came out at the beginning of the pandemic, when we were faced with possible problems with regards to face masks and personal protective equipment, and there was a natural reaction coming from some parts of the EU, but also it was, I think, a general reaction across the globe for people to call for sort of more localized production. That would be the magical solution to fix problems with such types of situations. And I would say that that's only a solution on the face of it. When you really think about it, and the possibility that your own production facilities become crippled, you start realizing that that's not a solution at all. That actually creates much more vulnerabilities and creates additional problems for you in the long run. And as a result of that sort of dynamic, that thinking, we came to the idea of open strategic autonomy, which was meant to emphasize that, yes, in certain situations and in certain contexts, you do need to invest in your own sort of internal capacities, strengthen that aspect of your actions in various means, look at that resilience question, but that if you're turning your back to the world through this policy, then you're shooting yourself in the foot. That whatever you do to strengthen your internal capacity has to go hand in hand with the openness bit, the part about making the best use of the opportunities that the international sphere provides, and trying to shape that international sphere to your liking as much as possible. So rather than turning your back, actually embracing that world and trying to really shape it so that you're able to pursue your interest. And as we saw over the months that the pandemic developed, I think we saw a new consensus, or at least much more discussion taking place with regards to this openness aspect. That resilience cannot be achieved simply through internal means. Part of resilience is, in certain cases, making sure that your supply chains are sufficiently diversified, that in order to have that you have trade agreements in place and appropriate bilateral relationships in place, so that you can shift suppliers when the need arises. So all of those elements come together in this question. The final thing I would say, it's a very dangerous territory to think about increasing resilience from the perspective of sort of moving toward protectionism. Protecting yourself from vulnerabilities, protecting yourself from unfair trade practices is completely different from the sort of protectionism that we've known in the 1930s, and that some perhaps would like to go back to today. And that is something that we need to avoid at all costs, because it would have an extraordinarily negative effect on our economy, but also at our ability to pursue the non-trade interests that we had, be it climate change, be it the digital sphere, or sustainability more broadly.
No return to protectionism, and that's really music to my ears. We have 1 minute left, so I'm going to ask everyone to provide a maximum 2-sentence answer to the last question. We got a question: what the experts think about the rising competitiveness of Asian markets and how it would affect the EU and their particular member states. So earlier this year, the Commission tried to negotiate a comprehensive agreement on investment with China, which was very much criticized. There are a lot of countries out there on the globe that have different political and human rights values to the EU. Is it possible to have increased trade relationships with them? And if so, how can this be conducted? Difficult question, but I would very much ask to provide some short thoughts. Carlo, would you like to kick off first?
Oh, how many days do we have to answer? Of course, the question is very complex, and the answer must be very pragmatic. I mean, I think most of us would agree that full unilateral trade opening would be first best solution, but this is not going to happen anyway. And there are in fact a number of policy induced distortions like environmental regulation, labor regulation, and the like that make it at least very, very hard to go that way. So I think we have to deal with China and other Asian economies the same way we have dealt with any other country or economy in the world, that is by negotiating and trying to find practical agreements. What we have to avoid is that very important treaties become the hostage of small political or battles. I mean, we saw that with CETA, the trade agreement with Canada, when all this big agreement within the European Union and Canada for a few days was the hostage of the debate in Wallonia. And with all the due respect for the Wallonian parliament, that's simply absurd. So I think that lies the issue, and more transparency and more stakeholder engagement in the early stages is probably a big part of the answer, as Konstantinos said.
Piotr, what's your recommendation from the Commission side?
Well, I'll say that the response to growing competitiveness of our Asian partners is definitely not the idea of closing down and looking inward, which is I think we have a living example in the UK of some of the pitfalls of that type of approach in certain respects. The solution as to everything is a bit of flexibility in approaches. You need to identify your interests with particular partners, sit down, try to hammer out ways of creating mutually beneficial trade relationships, and take it from there. There is no one size fits all approach to any of this.
Gentlemen, I very much enjoyed your insights in the last hour or so. So thank you very much for being with us. I'm afraid we overrun by a couple of minutes, but special thanks to our active audience as well. Your interest and contributions were very much appreciated. And if you would like to hear a bit more from our speakers and their research, make sure to check out epicenternetwork.eu, where many of their publications and articles are freely available to you. Also, special thanks to our partner and the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for helping to arrange this discussion, and also for providing a firm liberal voice in the Brussels bubble and across the continent. And last but not least, also special thanks to the generosity of the Atlas Network and its donors for providing us with the resources to engage with this topic and to work towards a more free trading and more global European Union. Thank you so much for your time and have a nice afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.